There's a particular kind of silence that arrives after you've tried to explain yourself for the third time in a single conversation. It isn't peaceful. It's the silence of giving up. You stop mid-sentence, and you watch the other person's face, and something quiet clicks into place. The recognition that the problem was never that you weren't clear enough. The problem was that clarity was never what they were listening for. You have probably lived this scene more times than you'd like to count. A parent who decided who you were when you were 9 and has not revised the file since. A partner who treats every conversation as a courtroom in which your intent is the thing on trial. A coworker who filters whatever you say through whatever they'd already assumed. You rephrase, you give context, you try to be fair to the other person's version of things and fair to your own. And somewhere in the middle of all that careful work, you notice a hollow, tired feeling settling into your chest. The specific exhaustion that comes from spending your words on people who were never going to count them. That exhaustion is not in your head. Psychologists have a name for the state you slip into when you're compulsively trying to be understood by someone who isn't available to understand you. They call it chronic justification. And the more closely researchers have studied it, the more it turns out to be doing something to you, to your nervous system, to the way your brain processes threat, to the relationship you carry with your own interior life, that most people never connect to those long, patient conversations where they only wanted to be fair. What I want to walk you through today is what actually shifts inside you when you make the decision to stop. Not to go cold, not to withdraw, not to turn into the kind of person who answers important questions with a shrug. Something much smaller than that, and much more radical. What happens when you stop spending words on people who were never going to receive them, and what that change does to the shape of your inner life? Because the research is more specific than most people realize, and so are the consequences. Here's the first thing most people miss. Over-explaining looks like communication, but it rarely is. Underneath, what it almost always is negotiation. You are trying to secure something from the other person. Agreement, acceptance, a revision of the narrative they are holding about you. And negotiation runs on a completely different nervous system setting than connection does. When you feel the pull to explain, that specific urgency to make the other person see it from your side, your brain isn't relaxed. It isn't curious. It is registering the situation as a threat. Not a physical threat, but a social one, which the amygdala doesn't differentiate between particularly well. Being misunderstood by someone whose perception of you matters is, neurologically speaking, close enough to being cornered that the same alarm system fires. Cortisol rises. Your attention narrows. Blood flow shifts away from the parts of your brain that handle nuance and toward the parts that handle urgent fixing. And the fix your body is reaching for is the same every time. Get them to see. Close the gap. Return the threat to zero. But here's the trap. The gap rarely closes. Because the gap was never really about information. If it were about information, one good explanation would solve it. The gap is about what being seen correctly means for your sense of safety. in the relationship, in the room, in your own skin. And when another person is not equipped or willing to see you accurately, no amount of information will get you there. You can keep feeding the machine forever. It will never produce the result you are trying to buy. What happens in the body over time, if you live inside this pattern, is something subtle and corrosive. Your baseline stress level creeps upward. You don't notice it because the adjustment is gradual. But the version of you that is always a little bit on, a little bit prepared to defend, to clarify, to correct, is running on a low hum of activation that never fully turns off. It follows you into the car after the conversation. It follows you into sleep. It becomes the tone of your interior life. When you stop, the hum stops. Not immediately, and not because you have convinced yourself it should. The amygdala is slower than the mind. But after a week, 2 weeks, a month of refusing to feed the cycle, the body begins to register something new. That being misunderstood is not, in fact, an emergency. That your safety does not actually depend on their revised opinion. That you can be seen wrongly and remain entirely intact. That shift from chronic alert to settled presence is the first thing you get back. And it does not feel like nothing. Here is something people don't usually connect until it is pointed out. The brain in chronic justification mode is not the brain at its best. Far from it. When the amygdala is elevated, the prefrontal cortex, the part of you responsible for careful thought, long-range planning, creative synthesis, real self-knowledge, operates at reduced capacity. This is not a metaphor. It is measurable. Neuroscientists have watched it happen in real time under imaging, which means the version of you that is frantically trying to explain your way out of a misunderstanding is not, at a biological level, the sharpest version of you. It is the most reactive one. And this explains something that over-explainers often describe without knowing why. The sense that they can never quite say what they mean in the moment. That the perfect formulation arrives 2 hours later. That they always leave important conversations feeling a half step behind their own thoughts. They are not imagining it. They are watching in real time what happens to clarity when it has to compete with threat response. When you stop explaining, your cognitive bandwidth comes back. Not as a feeling of brilliance, something quieter. Your thoughts begin to settle into place before you say them, rather than arriving half-formed and under pressure. You find that you have access to a kind of language you did not know you had. Precise instead of persuasive. Grounded instead of performative. Closer to what you actually mean. And further from what you think will land. You notice at the end of conversations that you did not walk away feeling blurred. You said what was true, or you did not. And either way, the words belonged to you. That is what getting your prefrontal cortex back feels like, in ordinary terms. It feels like thinking again. Like the mental equivalent of taking a deep breath after months of shallow ones. The people around you may or may not notice, but you will. And gradually, the pattern reverses. Instead of producing your best insights an hour after the conversation ended, you start producing them inside the conversation itself. And sometimes choosing from that clearer place not to produce them at all. Which brings us to something subtler. The word for the pattern is arrangement. Most compulsive explainers are, without knowing it, living inside an implicit arrangement, one they never consciously agreed to, but have been upholding for years. The arrangement goes like this. You bring the explanations, and in exchange, the other person grants or withholds understanding. They decide when you have said enough. They decide whether your version counts this time. And because their understanding is the currency you are paid in, you keep supplying. Even when the supply is never enough. Even when the terms keep shifting. Even when the understanding, when it finally comes, is always provisional. This is not a partnership. It is a dependency relationship with understanding itself. And it is almost always lopsided. One person is working. One person is judging. And the harder the working person tries, the more the judging person learns they do not have to meet them halfway. Why would they? The supply is endless. Carl Jung, writing about the psychology of adulthood, observed that one of the last stages of becoming a fully formed person is the moment you stop outsourcing the verdict on your own experience. He called this the development of the inner witness, the capacity to know what is true for you without requiring a counsel of others to confirm it. Most adults, in his view, never fully develop this. They remain, well into their 40s and 50s and 60s, subtly dependent on external ratification. Every emotion needs to be narrated to someone. Every decision needs to be validated by someone. Every instinct needs to be checked against someone's reaction before it can be trusted. When you stop explaining, you begin to see the arrangement for what it is. Not all at once, in small moments. You notice the reflex to send the long text. You notice yourself starting to justify the dinner you chose, the book you read, the opinion you held. And for the first time, you notice that you have a choice. The explanation isn't the water you're swimming in. It's a particular response to a particular perceived threat. And the response is optional. Choosing not to offer it the first few times feels unnatural, almost rude. There is a small panic. But underneath the panic is something interesting. A small, clear pocket of relief. The recognition that you do not have to pay the toll. That the road was always open. That the arrangement you thought was the cost of being in relationship was in fact an arrangement you could simply decline. And once you have declined it a few times, the quality of your life starts to rearrange itself around you. Here's the thing nobody warned you about. When you stop explaining, you do not become more popular. You become legible in a new way. And some of the people in your life will find this quietly uncomfortable. The uncomfortable truth is that a meaningful number of the relationships in most adult lives are held together by the dynamic of one person managing the other. Not always cruelly, often unconsciously. But there is a version of closeness that runs entirely on the explainer's side of the field. And when the explainer steps off the field, the closeness reveals itself for what it was. Not connection. Performance. A kind of ongoing audition. Those relationships do not survive the shift. They do not usually end dramatically. They just thin out, drift, go quiet. The friend who enjoyed being the arbiter of your decisions finds other people to arbitrate. The family member who used your explanations as the raw material for their ongoing disappointment finds the material running low. The partner whose intimacy depended on your willingness to be in constant emotional cross-examination discovers, to their surprise, that they do not know what to do with a person who has stepped off the stand. This is painful. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Some of the losses will feel disproportionate to what was actually there. But what you learn as the dust settles is that the relationships that remain have a different quality than almost anything you had before. They run on actual exchange. The other person is genuinely curious about what you think, not waiting for their turn to evaluate it. Your silences are allowed to be silences. Your no is received as information, not as an opening move in a negotiation. Your inner life is permitted to be yours. You will almost certainly have fewer people in your life after this than before. This is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that something that was hidden has become visible. The people you keep will be the ones who were always real. And the ones who drift away were, in a very specific sense, never quite there to begin with. Not in the version of them you had been curating with your endless explanations. They were there for the curation. When the curation ended, so did they. Now for something Marcus Aurelius understood in the 2nd century, and most modern self-help has forgotten. The people who hold the most durable sense of themselves, the ones who cannot be shaken easily by outside opinion, who seem quietly unflappable even inside storms, tend to share one characteristic. They do not broadcast their needs. This is not coldness. It is not mystery as an aesthetic. It is something much more practical. When you over-explain, you reveal your architecture. You show people exactly where your tender places are. You show them what you require from them in order to feel okay. And whether they mean to or not, they file that information. The ones who wish you well use it gently. The ones who don't use it as leverage. And even the ones who love you will, sometimes, without quite meaning to, adjust their behavior around your visible vulnerabilities in ways that serve neither of you. When you stop explaining, you stop publishing the manual. You stop telling people which levers produce which reactions. You become, in a technical sense, harder to operate. And the interesting thing is that the people who were operating you, whether consciously or not, will find this disorienting. And the people who weren't will barely notice the change. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this in his own private notebook. He was not trying to be imposing. He was trying to protect something. A fortified inner space that no outside judgment could enter without his permission. He called it the inner citadel, and he treated it as the single most important structure a person could build. Not a wall against the world, a seat of gravity within it, a place from which he could meet anyone without being pulled off balance by them. You build that by keeping more inside. Not everything, not from everyone, but enough that your center of gravity is no longer located in other people's mouths. This is the one people do not expect, and it may be the most important. When the explaining stops, something strange happens to your inner voice. It gets louder, not in volume, in clarity. For most of your adult life, if you have been a chronic explainer, your inner voice has been sharing airtime with a second voice, the voice that runs translation, the voice that is always in the background, scanning what you think and rehearsing how it will need to be framed to land well with other people. Most over-explainers do not know they have this second voice, because it has been running so long that they mistake it for their actual thoughts. They believe their beliefs are the versions that can be defended. They believe their preferences are the versions that can be justified. Somewhere underneath, there is a different version. But the translation voice is so constant that the underneath voice has become faint. When you stop explaining, the translation voice has nothing to do. Slowly, it quiets. And in the space it leaves, you begin to hear something you may not have heard clearly since you were a child. Your actual first thought. The one that is not already pre-processed for an audience. The one that might be messier, more inconvenient, less acceptable, and also more alive, more useful, more yours. This takes time. The translation voice does not shut off in a week. But the more you practice letting thoughts arrive without immediately imagining how you would explain them, the more you recover access to something quieter underneath. Jung called it the individuated self. Kierkegaard called it the self that stands alone before its own life. The language varies. The thing it points at does not. And once you can hear yourself clearly, the quality of your choices changes. You start to notice when something is genuinely yours, and when it is a version of yours that has been adjusted for external consumption. You start making decisions from the inside of your life, rather than from the outside. The shape of your days begins to match the shape of your actual preferences. And that shift, subtle, gradual, almost invisible from the outside, is what most of the old philosophers were pointing at when they wrote about freedom. It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It is the simple experience of being, finally, one person instead of two. The version of you that stops explaining is not harder. It is not distant. It is not armored. If anything, it is softer, because it has less to defend. What the explaining was protecting was never really you. It was your hope that the right combination of words might reliably produce your own sense of legitimacy in other people's reactions. That hope was always going to disappoint you. Not because the people were bad, but because legitimacy cannot be outsourced. It has to be built inside. You do not have to decide all at once to stop. No one does it that way. You start small. You let one misunderstanding pass without the long follow-up text. You say the thing and stop, instead of qualifying it 3 times. You notice the reflex to justify, and just once, choose not to. The first time, it feels strange. The second time, less so. By the 10th, something in you will have shifted. Quietly, but permanently. What gets built across months of this is not a wall. It is a floor. A sense of your own experience as real without requiring witnesses. A relationship with your own inner life that does not waver when someone else fails to see it. A private steadiness that does not depend on anyone else's comprehension to stay upright. From that floor, the rest of your life looks different. Not because your circumstances have changed, but because you have. You are not chasing anything. You are not performing anything. You are, perhaps for the first time in your adult life, simply here, inside your own experience, at home in your own mind, quietly and completely your own. That is what becomes possible when you stop explaining.